Before Isadora Villeneuve became the face of a glamorous revolution, she was just a name whispered through the marble halls of ancient empires, heiress to a fortune with roots as deep as the fear buried in her soul. Daughter of an oil tycoon and an eccentric Austrian former model, Isadora was raised among baccarat crystal goblets and muffled screams in private mansion wings, hiding more than relics. From a young age, Isadora learned that beauty was currency, silence was armor, and love was a dangerous weakness. But behind her amber eyes and gowns worth more than small nations, something untamed simmered, something wild. The woman the world would come to admire for her audacity and devastating elegance wasn't born that way. She was forged through nights of locked screams and fake smiles before aristocrats hungry for matrimonial alliances. Rebellion wasn't a choice, it was survival. Isadora's darkest secret was herself, a woman who would never allow herself to be tamed. At 24, with dozens of magazine covers, billions in her account, and a castle of her own in Bordeaux, Isadora was known for calculated scandals and razor-sharp quips. But behind the cameras, her life was a deadly chessboard, its pieces moved by invisible hands. Her father, Lord Villeneuve, was pushing her to marry Prince Louis of Genoa, a man whose only emotion seemed to be boredom. She, on the other hand, was planning the unthinkable, to destroy her own wedding. On a sweltering summer night during a masquerade ball in Capri, the idea was born. A dance with a stranger, a whisper in her ear, and the spark of ruin was lit. Isadora wanted more than to escape a marriage. She wanted to expose the rotten gears of an elite that still viewed women as bargaining chips. And she would do it with style, using her own image against them. Choosing a substitute groom was more than bold. It was defiance incarnate. She needed someone improbable, someone who shattered every royal rule. Her mind wandered through dangerous, forbidden names: a legendary hacker wanted by 3 governments, a mercenary exiled from Eastern European battlefields, and an ex-lover whose presence still burned under her skin like absinthe. But Isadora knew she couldn't give in to her flesh. The plan was calculated, precise, ruthless. What she didn't foresee was what came next. The look. A simple haircut, a physical transformation, a new man before her, and everything unraveled. The woman who ruled corporations and heads of state melted at a touch, at a glance. Pleasure became a trap, and the hoax became real. In this game of power, fame, and lust, the darkest secret wasn't the contract, it was her, Isadora, wild, untamable, who dared to love. What do you think she should do now? Tell us in the comments. Would you trust your own desire, or stick to the plan at all? Costs. The morning after the Capri masquerade, the world outside Isadora's villa sparkled with Mediterranean perfection. Blue skies, jasmine-laced breeze, and paparazzi already crowding the edges of the cliffs, their cameras hungry. But inside, the aftermath of one dance threatened to crack everything. She hadn't meant for it to feel like that. She hadn't meant for the scent of his skin, a mix of smoke and citrus, to linger so vividly. The masked stranger hadn't just danced with her, he had read her. And when he whispered in her ear, it wasn't flattery or seduction, it was recognition. "I know what you're planning," he had said, "and I want in." It was as if lightning had struck her spine. That voice, she hadn't heard it in years. And yet, it haunted her sleep, her worst mistakes, her one real heartbreak. If it was who she feared it was, then the game had changed. Not because of the plan, but because of him. Back in her private salon, Isadora dismissed her staff with a snap of her fingers. She poured herself a whiskey, neat, and stared into her own reflection. This was supposed to be a show, a performance. And yet, the tremble in her wrist said otherwise. She knew that look. She had felt it before. The same fire that once reduced her to ash Could she really let him back in? But before she could question further, her assistant entered with an encrypted tablet. "He left this for you. No name, but you should see it." The screen flickered to life. A single message, coded in binary, translated instantly in her mind. It read, "Call off the wedding or the real game begins." Below it, a video, her father sitting in his study, speaking to someone off camera. "You think she suspects anything?" the voice asked. Lord Villeneuve replied, "It doesn't matter. By the time she finds out, the throne will be ours, and she'll be his, like it or not." The color drained from her face. This wasn't just about a forced marriage anymore. This was a conspiracy, a betrayal wrapped in protocol and silk. And the stranger in the mask, whether enemy or ally, was her only chance to burn it all down. Now, her pleasure contract wasn't just an act of rebellion, it was war. And war, Isadora knew, required sacrifices, starting with the truth. The following night, Isadora's villa turned from sanctuary to war room. Every curtain drawn, every staff member dismissed, every camera disabled. Only a single lamp lit the opulent study where she waited. Her hand hovered near the antique dagger, mounted on the wall, a family heirloom from some forgotten baroness ancestor. Tonight, she needed the blood of her legacy near. He arrived precisely at midnight. No words, no theatrics, just the scrape of the door against marble and the silhouette of a man who once shattered her. His face, now visible, had changed, sharper, harder, but the eyes, those stormy, knowing eyes, hadn't aged a second. "Hello, Isa." Her breath caught. No one called her that anymore, not in years. "I should kill you," she said, voice low. "You should," he agreed, "but you won't." And she didn't. Instead, she poured 2 glasses of cognac and handed him one. Her, fingers brushing his, electricity, regret, desire. She hated how easy it was to fall back into their rhythm. "You knew everything," she said. "The plan, the engagement." "My father." He nodded. "And I know what's coming next. That's why I'm here." They sat across from each other, not lovers, not enemies, co-conspirators against a world that had turned both of them into weapons. He unfolded a dossier from his coat. Inside, blueprints of the royal estate, encrypted bank transfers, records of clandestine meetings between Lord Villeneuve and European political operatives. "They're building something bigger than a marriage," he said. "A syndicate, a new axis of control, and you're the crown jewel they need to legitimize it." Isadora leaned back. "So I really am just a pawn?" "No," he said, "you're the queen, and it's your move." Together, they drafted a counterstrike. The pleasure contract would remain, but now it had new clauses: espionage, exposure, entrapment. She would proceed with the wedding, play the role of the seduced bride, while he dismantled their empire from within. And yet, as night turned to dawn, strategy gave way to vulnerability. They stood at the balcony, watching the sun rise over the Riviera. "I never stopped," he said. "Loving me," she whispered, regretting it. The silence between them was more honest than any vow. For now they were allies. For now they were fire and silk, steel and shadow. But what happens when betrayal comes from the one you trust the most? Isadora Villeneuve had always lived as if the world were her stage, and every step she took a calculated pirouette under glaring chandeliers. But now, beneath layers of silk and power, her empire was rotting. The wedding to Prince Louis was a ticking bomb, an event orchestrated not by love, but by lineage, greed, and silent wars disguised in royal handshakes. Her rebellion wasn't impulsive, it was ancestral. The days blurred as the media storm intensified. Photographers lined every hedge of her estate, drones hovered near her balconies, tabloids devoured her every gesture. The Baroness of Bordeaux, they called her, as if the title alone erased the truth that she was a prisoner in couture. Inside her, however, a different truth blazed. She had become both the cage and the fire. Each morning began with silence. Her estate's eastern wing was off limits even to her most trusted staff. There, in a series of vaulted rooms beneath the gardens, Isadora plotted not just to escape, but to dismantle everything. Her co-conspirator, known in the intelligence underground as Lysander, moved like wind between shadows. To the outside world, he didn't exist. To her, he was both the most dangerous and necessary man she'd ever known. They met in fragments. At dawn, he'd leave encoded notes in the folds of her robes. At dusk, he'd appear behind tinted glass, speaking to her through reflections. And at night, when the world believed her asleep, he'd slip through hidden passages, sharing maps, audio intercepts, blueprints, and sometimes silence. The kind of silence that speaks of past sins and unresolved hunger. One such night, thunder broke over Bordeaux, lightning flashing across the endless vineyards. In the dimly lit conservatory, Isadora stood barefoot among dying roses. Rain slapped against the glass ceiling as Lysander emerged from the dark. "They've accelerated the timeline," he said without preamble. "Who?" she asked, her voice like velvet over a blade. "Your father, the syndicate, everyone. You're not just marrying a prince, Isadora, you're anchoring a global shift in power. They plan to announce the merger during the wedding ceremony. The contract they'll unveil is more than symbolic. It binds entire economies." She closed her eyes. "And me, you become the queen of a throne built on surveillance, oil, arms, and silence. Once you say yes at that altar, you validate the machine. Then we burn the altar," she whispered. He looked at her. "No seduction, no pity, just truth. We'll need more than fire." The next day, Isadora began executing Phase 2. Publicly, she played the part of the smitten bride. Her social media fed curated joy, fittings with world-renowned designers, tastings with chefs flown from Kyoto and Marrakesh, and a viral moment when she gifted Prince Louis a custom Jaguar, both the animal and the car. The internet devoured it. Overnight, the hashtag Royal Rebel Bride trended in 50 countries. But behind that screen, she orchestrated chaos. She began leaking misinformation to her father's inner circle. Fake diary entries hinting at a runaway. In plan, photographs staged to suggest an affair with a rival diplomat, and a forged medical report claiming she was infertile. Each detail was calculated to sow dissent, and it worked. The court began to whisper, advisors bickered, trust cracked, but the real blow came from within. One afternoon, while reviewing intercepted messages in her secret chamber, Lysander froze. He replayed a file 3 times, his face unreadable. Finally, he looked at her. "It's your mother." Isadora's stomach turned. "She's alive?" "No, that's impossible. She faked her death. She's been hiding for years. But now she's back, and she's not alone." Isadora staggered back. Her mother, Elena, had vanished 2 decades ago, supposedly in a plane crash off Corsica. Her disappearance had gutted her father and forged Isadora into the woman she'd become. But if Elena was alive, everything changed. Lysander continued. "She's leading a counterfaction. They call themselves the Red Aria. Their goal to bring down the syndicate, and they want to meet you. Tonight." Isadora's breath caught. Her past, her future, her bloodline, all colliding in a single storm. The wedding was in 6 days. Her father believed she was compliant. The world believed she was in love. The prince believed he controlled her, but now the mother she had mourned for 20 years had returned, not as a victim, but as a revolutionary. Everything she knew was a lie, and maybe, just maybe, that was her greatest weapon. Rain whispered over Bordeaux like secrets from ghosts long buried. Isadora stood at the edge of the forest behind her estate, the same trees where she once played as a girl. Now a cathedral of shadows and memories. She wore black, not for mourning, but for truth. She would meet her mother tonight. Not the myth, not the memory, the woman who had vanished and left a trail of silence carved into her heart. She moved through the trees, guided only by a dim red lantern hung from a branch. A signal. At its base stood a woman wrapped in a crimson cloak, her face half hidden beneath a veil. But even in the dark, Isadora recognized the tilt of her chin, the defiance in her posture. Elena Villeneuve. Not a ghost, not a fable. Alive. "You grew into your fire," Elena said, her voice dry as old parchment and just as cutting. Isadora didn't respond. She stepped forward and looked into the woman's eyes. They were her own. Elena removed her veil. Time had sculpted her face with cruel artistry, but it hadn't broken her. She looked like a woman who had led revolutions in silence. "Why?" Isadora asked. "Because I refused to be sold," Elena answered. "Because I saw the beast your father was becoming. Because I knew one day you'd have to make the same choice I did, and I prayed you'd choose war." A figure emerged from behind Elena, a tall, veiled man with the insignia of the Red Aria branded into his leather collar. The counterfaction was real and prepared. They handed Isadora a dossier thicker than any she'd read in her vaults. Inside were decades of documentation, the syndicate's corruption, evidence of bribes, assassinations, corporate espionage, media manipulation, all threaded through the network her father controlled. "You're not marrying a prince," Elena said. "You're crowning the executioner of free nations." The realization hit like iron. Her wedding wasn't just a pageantry of wealth, it was the gateway to global authoritarianism, disguised in royal silk. "What do you want from me?" Isadora asked. "Not your obedience," Elena said. "Your choice. Align with us and we take them down, from within. But you must risk everything, your name, your power, your love." Lysander stepped from the trees, having listened in silence. His eyes met Isadora's, silently asking, "Can you survive this truth?" Back at the estate, Isadora sat alone in her tower chamber, the dossier on her lap and lightning crawling over. The windows. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but fury, the pieces aligned. Her childhood wasn't luxury, it was training. Her silence wasn't submission, it was strategy. And now she saw the board. The next morning she summoned Prince Louis. He arrived promptly, dressed in ceremonial white. She offered him tea in a porcelain cup older than their kingdom. "Tell me, Louis," she said with poisoned sweetness, "what would you do for the crown?" He raised an eyebrow. "Anything, of course. Even lie, betray, kill." He leaned back. "Isadora, we all wear masks. Some of us are simply more practiced," she smiled. "Then let's practice together." That afternoon, Isadora announced a change in the wedding venue. It would be moved to her ancestral vineyard, an estate deep in the countryside, where the press and security could be tightly controlled. She told her father it was for intimacy. He believed her. Everyone did. But she had chosen the vineyard for another reason. Underneath it lay miles of wine tunnels built during the Napoleonic Wars, perfect for covert movement, weapon smuggling, escape routes. The Red Aria arrived under the guise of wedding planners, chefs, stylists. Elena moved like a ghost, slipping between realities, rebuilding a revolution beneath rose petals and chandeliers. Every detail of the wedding became a battlefield. The floral arrangements hiding encrypted tech, the catering staff trained in espionage, the orchestra embedded with operatives. And yet, as the world celebrated a love story, Isadora wrestled with another truth. She was falling again, for the man who walked through fire with her, who never asked for her obedience, only her fury. Lysander was not a prince. He was not clean, but he was hers. One night before the wedding, they met under the stars, away from bugs and lenses. "If we win," she asked, "what are we?" He took her hand, calloused and warm. "Broken, but free." She kissed him. Not for the cameras, not for the cause, but because even queens must bleed. The sun rose on the day of her wedding, gilded and deceptive. In 6 hours, she would walk down the aisle. In 7, the syndicate would burn, and if she survived, the empire would have a new mistress, not one of obedience, but of ruin. Continued in. The vineyard estate shimmered in gold, sunlight kissing the grapes as if nature itself were celebrating the union of two powerful bloodlines. Guests arrived in sleek convoys, their designer shoes tapping against stone pathways lined with white, roses and crimson orchids. To the world, this was the wedding of the century, a merger of elegance and empire. But beneath the surface, it was a battlefield. Every petal was a diversion, every toast a countdown. Isadora watched it all from the upper balcony of her bridal suite. She stood alone, cloaked in a gown that had been sewn with thread spun from silk and strategy. Designed by a house that owed its survival to her father, the dress symbolized submission, but she had lined its inner seams with blades. The corset concealed a transmitter, her earrings, micro-cameras. Even her bouquet was embedded with a gas dispersal capsule, emergency smoke if she needed to vanish. Elena entered without knocking, her face stern beneath the veil of a wedding planner's persona. Lysander is in position. The tunnels are secure. Red Aria agents are stationed along the outer field and within the reception staff. We have one chance. Isadora nodded. Her voice was calm. Then let's make it count. As the ceremony began, the estate transformed into a stage. A gospel choir sang a haunting melody that echoed through the valley. Isadora descended the grand staircase like a queen forged in battle. Applause rippled. The prince stood waiting, regal in gold-trimmed navy. But behind his eyes, she saw something new. Doubt. He took her hand. She let him. The officiant began, but Isadora's mind ticked like a metronome. Step 1, draw the crowd's focus. Step 2, create the breach. Step 3, seize the data. Lysander's voice crackled through the tiny comm in her ear. We have a problem. New agents, not ours. Who? She whispered. Interpol. And someone from your father's private guard, level black. Her heart skipped. The syndicate knew. The officiant asked the traditional question, Do you, Isadora Villeneuve, take... I do, she interrupted, voice louder than necessary. Gasps followed, confusion. She turned to the crowd, raising her bouquet. A sharp twist activated the capsule. Smoke burst like fireworks, cascading in white clouds. Screams erupted, cameras flashed, guards surged, and in that chaos, Red Aria moved. Elena led an extraction team into the control room beneath the estate. There, behind a wall disguised as a wine rack, lay the heart of her father's empire. Encrypted servers, housing names, dates, alliances, bribes, proof enough to collapse governments. Meanwhile, Isadora slipped into the tunnels with Lysander. Dirt, wine, darkness, they moved like wraiths. Behind them a symphony of chaos. Guests escorted out, security paralyzed. Her father caught off guard. You did it, Lysander whispered. Not yet, she said. There's one last curtain to pull. They emerged near the vineyard's outer gate, where an old truck waited. Eleanor joined them moments later, face flushed, triumphant, in her hands a hard drive. It's all here, she said, every betrayal, every lie. Then a gunshot. Elena collapsed, crimson blooming over her white blouse. Isadora screamed. Lysander dove for cover, returning fire toward the woods. Another shot. Then silence. Blood soaked the grass. Isadora dropped beside her mother, cradling her head. You have to finish it, Elena choked. Burn it all, even if it means... She didn't finish. More figures approached. The syndicate's elite guard, masked, armed, silent. Isadora stood slowly, face streaked with tears, her hand clutching the drive. I am not your pawn, she said. I am the reckoning. She raised her arm, tapped the emergency beacon hidden in her veil. A high-pitched tone echoed. In the distance, a series of detonations thundered. The estate, her father's symbol of control, was aflame. Helicopters arrived, not to save, but to record. Live footage streamed across the world. The bride, smoke in her wake, a data drive in her hand, walking away from a burning empire. She didn't look back. Red Aria agents gathered around her, some wounded, already. The wedding was over, but the war had just begun. The smoke had barely settled when the syndicate struck back. Isadora had watched her empire burn and walked out the flames like a goddess of vengeance. The footage of her defiant silhouette became the symbol of rebellion, spreading across digital platforms like wildfire. Hashtags, memes, global news segments, all fixated on the once spoiled heiress who dared to torch a legacy of corruption. But for Isadora, the fame was a distraction. Her war had just entered its bloodiest stage. The Red Aria retreated into the labyrinths beneath Marseille, old catacombs, converted into war rooms, tech havens, and escape routes. Isadora had barely slept since the vineyard burned. Her mother's death still carved its silence into her, but grief could not be afforded now, not when retaliation brewed in every shadow. Lysander stayed by her side, not as a lover, not even as an ally, but as a mirror. They no longer spoke in soft tones. Every word was a weapon, every plan sharpened like a dagger. "The syndicate has declared open war," he said one night, tossing a blood-stained folder onto the table. "Your father put a bounty on your head, $100 million, dead or alive." Isadora didn't flinch. "Then I'm worth more than I thought." They activated Phase 3. The Red Aria began targeting the arteries of the syndicate, hidden offshore accounts, laundering hubs in Dubai, arms dealers in Eastern Europe. Cyber attacks crippled financial systems, anonymous whistleblowers leaked data to global news networks. The world, once blinded by the glamour of the Villeneuve dynasty, now saw the rot beneath its gold. But with each blow, the enemy adapted. Her father surfaced on private broadcasts, speaking to the elite, painting Isadora as a traitor, a deranged daughter corrupted by radicals. He called her the Black Dahlia of Bordeaux, deadly, deranged, disposable. Worse, Prince Louis aligned himself publicly with Lord Villeneuve, claiming Isadora was mentally unstable and abducted by extremists. He released fabricated footage of their wedding day, edited to show her as violent, erratic, public opinion fractured. But Isadora knew the truth didn't need to convince everyone, only the ones with power. She arranged a summit in Vienna with 3 major financial families, neutral players who controlled the flow of global currencies. Dressed in black with a blade tucked beneath her sleeve, she presented the data from the drive, exposing the scope of syndicate manipulation. "They will kill billions," she said, eyes burning. "They already have." The families hesitated, but then one nodded, then another. They would freeze the syndicate's liquid assets. With their funding crippled, the syndicate began to splinter. Internal betrayals erupted. Old alliances collapsed. Paranoia turned their leaders against one another. Isadora smiled when news of the first defection arrived. One of her father's oldest advisors had fled and left a trail of proof in his wake. But victories came at a cost. 2 days later, Red Aria's safe house in Lisbon was bombed. 12 agents died. Another was captured in Berlin and broadcast live as a traitor. Isadora's hands trembled as she watched. For the first time, doubt crept in. Lysander touched her shoulder. "You didn't start this, but you have to finish it." She nodded. "Then we go to Geneva." The heart of the syndicate's legal empire pulsed in Geneva's financial district, an underground citadel guarded by biometric traps, ex-military operatives, and legal immunity. Breaking in meant facing their last threshold. The plan was suicide. But Isadora was no longer afraid of dying. That night, before departure, she stood over her mother's grave in secret. The tomb bore no name, just a symbol, a red aria mask carved in stone. "I'll burn it all, Mother," she whispered, "even if I become the ashes." At dawn, the team boarded a private aircraft cloaked under a medical relief charter. Inside, not supplies, but war. Weapons, gear, data. Isadora wore armor beneath her designer coat. This wasn't seduction anymore. It was extinction. Geneva greeted them with snow and silence. Underneath its pristine facade, however, the city buzzed with secrets. Isadora and the Red Aria infiltrated through the sewers beneath the financial district, bypassing the surface-level defenses. With Lysander leading, they advanced toward the Syndicate's final stronghold, a data citadel buried 50 meters underground. The air was cold, heavy with the scent of iron and inevitability. Their goal, the mainframe. If they could breach, it exposed the real-time communications and financial trails of the Syndicate. The world would have no choice but to act. The corridors were narrow, sterile, humming with electric tension. Security was tighter than expected. Tripwires, biometric checkpoints, guards bred for silence and kill orders. The Red Aria fought like phantoms, losing 2 more agents before breaching the vault's inner core. And then, face to face, stood Lord Villeneuve. He wore a 3-piece suit untouched by the chaos. His expression wasn't fear, it was fury tempered by disbelief. "You destroyed your name," he spat. "For what? A fairy tale, a ghost of a woman who abandoned you." Isadora stepped forward, eyes like flint. "I destroyed your illusion, and now I'll build something better." He reached for a silent alarm. A gunshot rang out. Lysander didn't hesitate. Lord Villeneuve fell, blood blooming across his chest like a rose. It was done. Isadora stepped into the core chamber and uploaded the final sequence. Terabytes of evidence flooded the networks. Names, transactions, murders. The Syndicate's skeletons were now public record. Within hours, governments launched investigations. Arrests rippled across continents. She stood in the center of the room, trembling. Not from fear, from release. 3 months later, Isadora walked barefoot through the same vineyard where it all began. The estate had been rebuilt, not with gold and arrogance, but with intention. The world no longer saw her as a spoiled heiress or a runaway bride. She had become a symbol, a woman who severed her bloodline to stop tyranny. The Red Aria, now global, worked under a new banner, the Mistress Empire, an intelligence and humanitarian coalition that protected whistleblowers, dismantled criminal networks, and advised emerging governments. And at its helm, Isadora, she didn't rule with fear. She ruled with clarity. Every move strategic, every risk calculated. Elena's memory lived in every decision. Lysander remained beside her, not in secret, not in shadow, but in sunlight. They weren't lovers in the way of youth, but partners, tempered by fire. He planted vines while she wrote policies. They argued, they laughed, they healed. One afternoon, as she addressed a conference on ethics and power, a child approached her. "Are you the real princess?" the girl asked. Isadora knelt down, brushed the child's hair aside. "No," she said with a smile. "I'm something rarer. I'm free." And the audience rose, not in applause, in awe. The Mistress Empire had begun, not in blood, but in rebirth. And Isadora Villeneuve, the woman once bought, betrayed, and buried in scandal, now stood not above the world, but beside it. The war was over, and she had won. If this story stirred something inside you, if Isadora's transformation made you question the limits of power, love, or freedom, then this is your moment to speak. Leave your mark in the comments. Would you have chosen vengeance like Isadora or walked away from the fire? Share this video with someone who believes in rising from the ashes. Because sometimes the most dangerous woman is the one who writes her own ending.